The soil on the outskirts of Denver had always been unremarkable, dry and brittle under the August sun. But on that day in 1899, it whispered a secret long buried, a secret that would grip the town in a silence so absolute it felt almost sacred. 4 lives, a father, mother, and 2 children, had been discovered beneath the earth, their small wooden shelter pressed tightly against the unforgiving rock. The air in the cavern had been stale for decades, yet something about it was almost alive. I first heard of them from the local sheriff, a man who had spent years chasing stories he would never tell. "You need to see this for yourself," he said, his voice carrying a tremor that was not born of fear, but of respect for what should have remained hidden. When I descended into that cramped space, lantern in hand, the weight of the earth above pressed down in a way that no language could describe. The family sat where they had been found, eyes open, faces pale as bone, hands clutching each other as if the soil itself had taught them to survive. And then I noticed it, a faint, deliberate rhythm in the silence, as if the walls themselves remembered each heartbeat, each breath, and refused to let it go. This is the story of their last days above ground and their eternity below it. A tale of devotion, terror, and the strange bargains people make when trapped between the living and the earth. From the first warning signs in the home they once loved, to the grim discovery that shook Colorado, every chapter traces the unseen bonds and horrors that bound this family together. Welcome to the Withered Ledger. Welcome to the story that should have remained beneath the soil. The Vanishing. The summer of 1899 had come early to the outskirts of Colorado. The fields, scorched gold by the sun, seemed to ripple under the heat, and the wind carried little more than dust across the narrow lanes leading to Denver. On one such lane, a house sat slightly askew from the road, its white paint flaking like old paper, its shutters trembling even in the faintest gust. This was the home of John and Margaret Wren, and their children, Emily and Samuel. From the outside, it was an ordinary dwelling. But what lay inside, and beneath, would soon rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about family, survival, and the quiet horrors that creep in silence. The first clue that something was amiss came not from the house itself, but from the whispers of the neighbors. Miss Halloway, whose cottage lay a stone's throw from the Wren property, reported seeing Emily standing at the window for hours, staring at the ground as though she expected someone to emerge from it. Samuel, smaller and quieter, had taken to carrying a small wooden box everywhere, muttering that it held the friends who lived under the boards. Most dismissed these observations as childhood fantasy. Children often invented companions, they said. But when Margaret appeared less frequently in the market, and John avoided the saloon where he had once been a regular, the pattern began to unsettle the town. I first heard of the Wren family not from gossip but from the sheriff's office. Sheriff Adler was a man of broad shoulders and narrowed eyes, accustomed to crime and calamity alike, yet there was a tension in his voice when he mentioned the family's last known movements. "It isn't just that they're missing," he said. "It's how they left. It's precise. Too precise for it to be chance." He handed me a notebook, its leather cover worn and cracked. Inside were scribbled observations, dates, times, small drawings of the house from different angles, sketches of children peering through cracks, and faint notations about the floorboards in the living room. The journals of John Wren were the first real window into their world. He wrote of days that began like any other, chores performed with mechanical attention, and evenings spent with his family in near silence. But then his entries grew strange. On July 12th he wrote, "Emily asks again about the whispers. I cannot find the source. Samuel insists the earth is listening. I fear they are becoming too attuned to it. Margaret notices nothing. I alone see the shape of it in the dark." Margaret's own notes, penned with a fine, almost tremulous hand, mirrored her husband's concern but carried a different weight. On the following day she wrote, "The children speak of friends beneath the floorboards. I try to dismiss it as play, yet when I lift the rug, their eyes track the hollow spaces below. They do not pretend. They wait. I feel a pulse in the boards that is not mine, not theirs, but alive." By late July, the Wren children's behavior had become increasingly unsettling. Emily, whose voice had once been clear and musical, now spoke only in fragments, often whispering to corners of the room no one occupied. Samuel, too small to fully articulate the strangeness, would crawl under the tables or chairs, murmuring encouragement to some hidden companion. Friends, they called them. But no one else could see. No one else could hear. The sheriff visited the house several times. His boots pressed into the dry wooden floor, leaving no creaks, yet the air seemed to shift around him. He noted the tension in the house, the unnatural stillness, the way the children would pause mid-movement to listen to silence. On one visit, he commented to me later, "I've walked into plenty of strange homes, but the Wren house, it waits for something. The air itself seems aware." Neighbors added their recollections. Mr. Pettinger, who worked the fields behind the Wren property, swore he saw small figures moving below the boards of the back porch on multiple occasions, long before anyone realized the family might be in danger. He described them as shadows, human-shaped, crouched beneath the wooden floor, watching the farmyard like predators. But when he approached, the figures vanished, leaving nothing but the impression of hollowness. By August, the absences became more pronounced. John rarely ventured outside, and Margaret stopped tending the garden entirely. Emily and Samuel appeared at windows only in fleeting glimpses, and at odd hours, sometimes before dawn, sometimes in the dusk that bled quickly over the mountains. They spoke less to the adults and more to the floors, the walls, the spaces beneath their feet. The sheriff noted that even the dogs refused to enter the house. They whined at the door or retreated into the shade. On the 21st, the sheriff sent me to document the family's home. The door creaked with the weight of months, revealing an interior frozen in partial chaos. Chairs were pulled back as if left mid-meal, the kitchen table bore signs of a hastily abandoned supper, and dust had settled only on horizontal surfaces, leaving the paths where the children had walked curiously clear. I followed the narrow corridors to the living room, where Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, Samuel beside her, their fingers tracing patterns in the warped floorboards. They did not look up. They did not speak. Yet when I stepped closer, I felt it, a pressure in the air, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. A pulse, subtle but persistent, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The children murmured words I could not understand, and for a moment I wondered if they were speaking a language of soil and timber, one that the living rarely perceive. Journal fragments we recovered later revealed the final days. John wrote of mapping the boards, measuring each plank, noting how they responded to weight, to light, to sound. Margaret described the children's insistence that the friends must be fed, though what feeding entailed was never made explicit. The sense of claustrophobia increased, as if the home itself was shrinking, pressing in on all four members of the family. Even the sheriff, when recounting his final observations before their disappearance, described a sensation of being observed, measured, and judged by something beneath the floor. On the evening of August 28th, the family vanished. The neighbors reported no sounds, no disturbances, no warning. The dogs yelped once, then fell silent. The sheriff found the doors locked from within, the windows latched. No footprints led away, no wagons were seen. And yet the journals suggested movement, careful, deliberate, as if the family had been preparing for something months in advance. The townspeople whispered explanations, fever, despair, or some strange ritual gone wrong. But the sheriff's notes were more methodical. He believed the Wren family had chosen to disappear into a space hidden from ordinary sight, a space beneath the earth, perhaps even beneath their own home. The journals, the children's words, and the markings on the floorboards all hinted at one possibility: the family had not fled but descended. And whatever lay below was patient, waiting, and unyielding. As I packed away the journals and sketches, I realized the gravity of what the sheriff had begun to suspect. This was not merely a disappearance, it was an experiment in survival, devotion, and terror. The family's bond had extended beyond the normal constraints of air and light, guiding them into a place where they could endure in ways the living would find unimaginable. The fear was not that they were lost, but that the space they had entered, the underground chamber they had prepared, might still be aware of them, still sustaining them in a state of preserved tension. Emily and Samuel's murmurs from earlier that month haunted the notes. They watch the boards. They breathe with us. We feed them. And John's meticulous calculations, Margaret's fearful observations, all pointed toward a purpose, a ritual, or perhaps a necessity that none in the town could comprehend. It was not escape, it was containment. Not disappearance, but suspension. By the close of Chapter 1, the sheriff understood the outline of the horror. The family had disappeared above ground, leaving nothing but journals, footprints frozen in dust, and the memory of whispers beneath floorboards. The stage was set. Their story, their lives, and their choices would be revealed only to those willing to descend into the earth alongside them. Every chapter after this would follow the Wren family as they endured, adapted, and confronted whatever had been waiting beneath the soil for generations, waiting for a family bound by fear, love, and the inexorable pull of the earth. The town moved on, though the unease remained. Dogs avoided the Wren property. Shadows seemed heavier in the late afternoons. And far beneath the floorboards, perhaps, for hearts beat together, in rhythm, in silence, in a place no light could reach. The cellar of the Wren house had always been ordinary, in the sense that cellars tend to be damp, lined with wooden beams, scented faintly of earth and mold. But after the disappearance of John, Margaret, Emily, and Samuel, the sheriff returned with lantern in hand and a notebook full of questions. Every creak of the stairs echoed like a drumbeat. Every shadow seemed to pulse with memory. The door to the cellar resisted, swollen by summer humidity. Its latch groaned as Adler lifted it, revealing darkness deeper than the light from his lantern could pierce. Dust hung in the air like suspended motes of memory. For a moment, he simply stood, listening, sensing a rhythm beneath the floor. A pulse. Not the heartbeat of the house, but something slower, deliberate, waiting. Lantern light fell on the stone walls, rough and pitted. Barrels of root vegetables, crates of preserves, and the faint outlines of furniture were all as the family had left them, untouched, but strangely arranged. Not chaotic, not abandoned, but deliberate, as if the house itself had paused in anticipation of something. And beneath it all, there was a faint smell, something organic yet unfamiliar, that seemed to seep from the very stones. Adler's boots pressed against the cold, uneven floor. He noticed first the markings, scratches in the boards that led toward a corner where the stone foundation met the earth. Tiny handprints, perhaps Emily's and Samuel's, or someone else's. They were careful, almost ceremonial, guiding the observer toward the far wall. There, partially obscured by darkness, a trapdoor revealed itself, hidden in plain sight, a panel whose edges had been worn smooth over time. He lifted it slowly. A rush of colder air spilled out, carrying with it the faint hum of something living beneath. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Adler felt it immediately. The sensation was not unpleasant, but it was not natural. He peered down into the narrow staircase, the stone steps slick with moisture, and realized that someone, or something, had been waiting. As he descended, the walls seemed to shrink, pressing in. Every sound was amplified, his own breathing, the scrape of boots against stone, the quiet drip of water somewhere below. And then he saw it. The floor opened into a chamber larger than he had anticipated. Wooden beams crisscrossed the ceiling, holding back the weight of the house above. And in the center, four shapes huddled together, lying not in cots or beds, but in a pit dug into the earth itself. John and Margaret, Emily and Samuel, their bodies pressed against each other, eyes closed, skin pale but smooth, almost luminous in the dim lantern light. They were alive, but in a way that defied understanding. They breathed, yes, but the air around them seemed suspended, as if the cellar itself was part of their being. Notes left by the family confirmed it. John had written of a descent, a plan to move the entire family underground, to create a place where air and light obeyed the rhythms they dictated. Margaret described her fear and her devotion, detailing how she had shored up the walls, how she had rationed food, and how she had maintained a strange harmony between the children and the hidden space beneath the boards. Emily and Samuel were awake, though either stirred fully. Their small hands reached for each other, fingers entwining, and their lips whispered to corners of the chamber where the light from the lantern could not penetrate. Adler realized then that the children were not imagining the companions beneath the floorboards. The companions were real, intertwined with the family's breath, feeding silently in the darkness. The walls themselves seemed to hum. Adler pressed his hand against the stone and felt a faint vibration, subtle but insistent. It was the pulse of the earth, yes, but more than that, it was the echo of years, generations of attention and care, focused into this single chamber. The Wren family had not merely hidden themselves. They had become part of the structure itself, a living lattice beneath the home, coiled around roots and stone, bound by determination, fear, and a ritual all their own. Adler took notes carefully. He sketched the positions of the bodies, the stairway, the corners of the chamber, and the markings on the walls. Each detail mattered. Each line suggested a method, a purpose. The children's murmurs were catalogued, fragments of phrases, names, perhaps chants, though their meaning remained inaccessible. The adults' journals suggested the same: preparation, endurance, a pact with the subterranean. Food stores lined the perimeter of the chamber. Each item was arranged deliberately: sacks of grain, jars of preserved fruit, bottles of water. The family had planned for months, rationing not only calories but the rhythm of light, the exposure to air, and the maintenance of a temperature that would allow them to survive in their underground prison. The level of planning was meticulous, almost clinical, yet suffused with devotion. As Adler examined the floor, he noticed a shallow indentation, worn into the stone. It was circular, roughly the size of a small table, and at its center, a narrow groove led toward a corner where a small wooden trapdoor had been set. This had to be the children's space, the place they had called Friend's Corner. The murmurings increased as he approached, soft and rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Adler felt a tug in his chest, a strange need to understand, yet also a warning not to interfere. The sheriff stepped carefully, lifting a crate of roots to reveal a hidden cavity beneath. Inside lay scraps of paper, etched with small figures, houses, and shapes that mirrored the floor plan above. There were notes in John's hand. "They follow us, they listen. Emily sees them best. Samuel knows their rhythm. They are patient." Margaret had added in a lighter, almost anxious hand. "We feed them, as they feed us. I fear what will happen if we fail." Adler felt the hairs on his neck rise. The chamber, the markings, the journals, and the children's whispered names suggested an intelligence below, not human, not fully comprehensible. The Wren family had crafted a symbiotic existence with something ancient, something patient and hidden beneath the house. Hours passed. Adler documented every corner, every board, every etched line in the stone. He realized that the family's disappearance above ground was only half the story. What mattered was the below, the subterranean world they had created, and the rules they had obeyed. Each chamber, each nook, each ritual object contributed to a balance that, if disrupted, could unleash consequences no one could predict. Before leaving, Adler looked back at the family. John and Margaret lay together, holding hands, eyes closed. Emily and Samuel's fingers twined across the gap between them. The lantern light flickered faintly, though no draft could reach it. He felt the hum of awareness, the house, the cellar, the family itself, as if every brick and beam were watching, waiting. As he ascended the stairs, the sheriff took one last note. The Wren family was alive, yes, but not in the way anyone above ground could comprehend. They were suspended between worlds, not dead, not fully living, coexisting with something hidden, patient, and eternal. The town below went about its routines, unaware. Dogs avoided the Wren property, and the air always seemed heavier in the late afternoons. Only the sheriff carried the knowledge of what lay beneath, a family bound by fear, love, and an intelligence older than any road or forest nearby. They had vanished, yet they endured, waiting for those who might one day descend and witness what the Wren family had chosen, a life beneath life, a captivity they had embraced to survive together. The cellar held its secrets, silent but sentient, as the Wren family slept, or observed, or waited, beneath the house above. And somewhere, in the rhythm of the boards, the pulse of the earth, and the murmured names of friends unseen, the true story of John, Margaret, Emily, and Samuel began to unfold. The hidden passage. The air beneath the Wren house was thicker than Adler remembered. Every breath felt like inhaling centuries of stone and earth, dense and alive. He returned to the cellar before dawn, lantern in hand, determined to map every corner nook where the Wren family might have created their hidden world. The journals were his guide, but the floorboards seemed to pulse with secrets, moving subtly underfoot, as if the house itself were aware of his intrusion. Near the far wall of the cellar, where Emily and Samuel had often whispered of their friends beneath the floorboards, Adler noticed something he had missed before, a small gap, almost imperceptible, where the stone met the beam. The gap was lined with scratches, delicate, deliberate, and too small for adult fingers. The sheriff knelt and pressed his palm to the wall. A faint vibration hummed back, rhythmic and patient. It was a heartbeat beneath the earth, slow but steady. He lifted a lantern closer, illuminating the faint outline of a narrow passageway, concealed behind stacked crates and jars of preserved fruit. The passage was too low for a grown man to walk upright, its walls rough-hewn and cold. Yet something in its design suggested purpose, a corridor built for those smaller than he, smaller than the adults above, yet capable of carrying influence far larger than their size might imply. Adler hesitated at the entrance. A sense of reverence mingled with dread. The journals had hinted at a route of safety, a hidden path beneath the cellar, a way for the children to move between chambers without disturbing the structure above. But what he found now was more than a route, it was a labyrinth. The walls bore marks, symbols etched into the stone, triangles, spirals, and lines that did not correspond to any alphabet Adler knew. These were signs of guidance, warnings, perhaps even invitations. He crawled forward, lantern balanced on one hand, notebook in the other. The passage narrowed, forcing him to inch along on hands and knees. The air grew colder, not the cold of night, but a heavy, deliberate chill that pressed against his bones. From somewhere ahead, a faint sound reached him, whispers, soft and layered, overlapping in cadence. They were Emily and Samuel, speaking to the walls, calling to something unseen. The walls shifted subtly as he advanced. The stones seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting imperceptibly. He paused, listening. Each movement, each drip of moisture from unseen cracks above, carried meaning. The Wren family had not merely dug into the earth. They had animated it, infused it with rhythm and purpose, creating a world below that responded to the will of its inhabitants. Eventually, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. Here, the walls were lined with shelves, not for food or storage, but for objects of ritual and necessity, small carvings, tiny beds, jars of water, and scraps of paper etched with cryptic diagrams. Emily's handwriting appeared on several notes. "We feed them when the air is right. They are patient, but they hunger." Samuel's notes were simpler, almost childlike. "They follow the rhythm. They never sleep." At the center of the chamber was a pit, carved into the stone floor, large enough to hold the four of them together. It was lined with soft cloth and straw, worn smooth as if by constant use. The walls bore faint impressions of hands, the children's, perhaps, or something else's. Adler could not tell where human touch ended and something else began. He explored further. A narrow, spiraling staircase led downward, deeper into darkness. Each step was etched with small notches, a tally perhaps of days or breaths or offerings. Lantern light revealed four faintly glowing stones set into the wall at intervals, casting a pale illumination that seemed unnatural, suspended between light and shadow. Adler felt a tug in his chest. The deeper he went, the more the space seemed to claim him, demanding attention and care. At the bottom, a final chamber revealed itself, a subterranean haven. Here, the Wren family had constructed a complete ecosystem, microcosmic and terrifying. Small plants thrived under faint lantern light, grown hydroponically in soil brought from the surface. A shallow stream of water flowed quietly along the floor, its source hidden, feeding into a small basin where the family drank and bathed. Even the air had rhythm here, shifting subtly as though breathing in tandem with the occupants. And there they were, John, Margaret, Emily, and Samuel, gathered in a circle. The children sat on their knees, hands extended toward the stones embedded in the floor. whispering words that Adler could not understand but felt in the marrow of his bones. The parents' eyes were closed, their expressions serene yet tense. It was a moment of ritual, not prayer, not meditation, but something older, deliberate, and vital. Adler stepped forward, but the air resisted. Each movement became heavier, the chamber tightening around him. The stones pulsed, faintly, with an almost imperceptible glow. The whispers rose in a harmonic cadence, vibrating through the walls and floor. Adler realized, with a chill that froze his spine, that this was not merely a home, or a cellar, or even a sanctuary. It was a construct of control, a miniature world bound by the family's will and something far older beneath them. He observed silently, taking notes, careful not to disturb the delicate balance. Emily's small hands hovered over one of the glowing stones, tracing circles in the air. Samuel mimicked her motions, eyes wide, lips moving in unison with the whispers. Margaret hummed softly, a sound that seemed to anchor the space, while John's hands hovered above them both, guiding and observing. Every gesture, every breath, was a thread woven into the tapestry of the chamber. Hours passed. Adler dared not speak, for even a whisper might unravel what they had built. He noted the alignment of stones, the placement of the pit, the interaction between the family members. Each action was deliberate, ritualistic, and imbued with a sense of reverence. Reverence not for God, or nature or man, but for the very structure of their subterranean existence. When Adler finally ascended, leaving the hidden passage behind, he carried more than notes. He carried understanding and terror. The Wren family had vanished from the surface, yes, but they had not disappeared. They had remade the earth beneath their home, bending stone and air, rhythm and ritual, to preserve themselves and whatever entities they had bound to their will. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the valley. The town remained oblivious, unaware that beneath a simple farmhouse, a family of 4 lived in a world both terrifying and intricate, coexisting with a force that defied logic and human comprehension. Adler shivered, lantern in hand, aware that this was only the beginning, that every hidden passage, every whisper beneath the boards, and every pulse in the stone carried a story, a secret, and a warning. The Wren family endured, suspended in a world of their own creation, waiting for the day when someone else might descend, witness, and understand, or fail to return. The breathless ritual. The air above the Wren house had grown heavier, thicker, as if every movement of the valley itself had slowed in anticipation. Sheriff Adler returned before midnight, lanterns swinging loosely at his side. Each step toward the cellar felt different than before, as though the earth beneath him was aware of his purpose. He carried nothing but his notebook and a growing dread, but he knew that the family below sensed him long before his boots disturbed the floorboards. He descended the stairs into the hidden passage, the lantern's weak glow revealing the familiar walls etched with scratches and symbols. The narrow corridor stretched ahead, suffocating in its closeness, yet alive, vibrating faintly, pulsing like the rhythm of a heart too large for a human chest. The whispers of Emily and Samuel reached him sooner this time, overlapping and layered, as though they were rehearsing a language older than their years. The children's voices were soft, almost melodic, but each syllable carried a command, an intention he could feel pressing against his ribs. At the chamber's entrance, Adler paused. The air shifted, denser, pressing against him from all directions. He realized that the family's ritual had begun. Within, the Wren family sat in their circle, the glow of the embedded stones casting pale light across their features. Margaret's hands hovered above the pit, her fingers trembling slightly, as though conducting the rhythm of the air itself. John's gaze was steady, commanding, but not over his children alone. He seemed to watch the stone walls, the air, the pulse of the underground chamber as if it were alive. Emily and Samuel moved in precise, mirrored motions, their small hands tracing invisible patterns above the stones. Adler noticed the pit beneath them, its surface eerily calm, lined with cloth that had darkened from years of use. Each child's breath seemed synchronized, inhalations and exhalations aligning with subtle vibrations in the walls. The chamber was no longer merely a passage beneath a house. It was a living organism, and the Wren family its keepers. Adler tried to step closer, to take notes, but the air resisted. His lungs burned against the unnatural pressure, each inhale heavier than the last. It was as if the chamber demanded obedience, demanded stillness, demanded understanding. One wrong step, one careless word, could collapse the fragile ecosystem the family had built. The whispers rose in volume, harmonizing into a rhythm that Adler felt in his bones, in his heartbeat, in the marrow of his fingers. The father, John, rose slowly. He moved with deliberate slowness, each step echoing faintly against the stone, though no sound should have traveled through this thick, suffocating air. He knelt beside Emily and Samuel, guiding their motions over the stones. Margaret's hum deepened, resonating through the chamber, blending with the vibrations in the walls. Adler realized the hum was not only musical, it was functional. It aligned the rhythm of the stones, the pulse of the pit, and the air itself, maintaining the delicate balance that kept the family alive. Suddenly, a faint mist rose from the pit. It swirled in suspended motion, forming shapes that suggested faces, fleeting and indistinct, as though the chamber itself was aware of an audience. The children's hands moved over the mist, coaxing it, molding it. Samuel's lips formed silent words, but Adler could feel their meaning, pressing into his consciousness. Feed. Balance. Hold. The sheriff realized then that the ritual was more than survival. It was negotiation. The family had bargained with something beneath the earth, an entity that thrived on control, on rhythm, on the suppression of breath. The children were not simply performing a task. They were keeping a promise older than the wood and stone of the farmhouse above. Every motion, every whispered syllable, maintained the fragile harmony of life in this subterranean world. Adler's lantern cast shadows that seemed to reach toward the pit. The mist above it pulsed with light in perfect rhythm with the children's movements. Each pulse carried weight, pulling the air around him, bending it, shaping it. He understood now, the chamber did not belong to the family alone. The stones, the pit, the very walls were active participants in the ritual. Emily and Samuel were conduits, and John and Margaret the anchors. Time seemed meaningless. Hours could have passed, or minutes, Adler could not tell. His watch ticked, but the sound was hollow, swallowed by the rhythm of the chamber. He observed, recording every detail, every subtle movement, every note of Margaret's hum. The children's hands traced patterns that matched symbols etched on the walls, connecting past, present, and something unseen. Then came the pause. The mist stopped swirling, hovering in perfect suspension. The hum quieted, leaving only a heartbeat beneath the stone. Adler could feel it, thumping through the floor, a resonance that matched the slow, synchronized breathing of the family. The moment was tense, expectant, as though the chamber itself waited for confirmation that the ritual had succeeded. John's eyes met Adler's. Not in anger, not in warning, but in recognition. He nodded faintly, a gesture that seemed to carry both permission and caution. The sheriff understood. He was not a participant, but he was acknowledged. His presence was noted, recorded by the subtle consciousness of the chamber, but not condemned. For now. Margaret rose, moving to the pit, and laid her hands flat on the cloth. The stones glowed brighter, illuminating the family's features with an ethereal light. Emily and Samuel mirrored her gestures, their whispers synchronizing perfectly. Adler felt the air itself tighten around him, pressing against his chest, constricting, yet invigorating. The family exhaled in unison, a single, measured breath that seemed to expel centuries of tension. In that exhalation, the chamber exhaled too. The mist settled, the stones dimmed, and the rhythm of the air returned to its baseline. The ritual had been performed successfully. The family's survival, bound to the subterranean entity, was secured for now. But Adler could feel the weight of the bargain lingering, pressing against his mind. This was not temporary. This was a pact that demanded obedience, vigilance, and silence. He stepped back, careful not to disturb the harmony. The lantern cast a pale glow, revealing the children's faces, serene and focused. They were small, yes, but immense in purpose. Each motion, each breath, each word, invisible, yet tangible, was the mechanism keeping them alive beneath the world that had forgotten them. Adler retraced his path, leaving the ritual chamber as undisturbed as possible. The air relaxed slightly as he ascended, the pressure lessening, but never entirely gone. The house above seemed normal, the valley silent but untouched by the unnatural rhythm beneath. Yet Adler knew better. He had seen it. He had felt it. The Wren family existed in two realms simultaneously, the world above, and the subterranean domain they had created, bound by rhythm, breath, and ancient, unspoken law. Outside, the first birds of dawn stirred, unaware of the silent struggle below. The town above continued its mundane routines, oblivious to the family that survived beneath their feet, sustained by something older, more deliberate than life itself. Adler paused, lantern in hand, and considered the enormity of what he had witnessed. The breathless ritual was not just survival, it was dominion, a delicate balance maintained by four humans and a force that refused to be named. As he returned to his office, Adler's mind replayed every gesture, every whisper, every pulse of the stones and the pit. The journals and notes from the family above ground had hinted at this, but seeing it, living it, left no doubt. The Wren family had forged a covenant with the earth itself, and any misstep could unravel the fragile web that sustained them. The sheriff knew the next chapters would only deepen the horror, the complexity, and the inevitability of the family's underground existence. Emily and Samuel, small yet monumental, were more than children. They were vessels, anchors, and guides. John and Margaret, though human in appearance, had become stewards of an unnatural law, ensuring that the pact remained intact. And the earth, alive beneath the farmhouse, waited. It watched. It remembered. The consequences of silence. The town of Redstone seemed quieter that morning than it ever had, though no one noticed. Windows rattled in their frames, doors creaked with unfamiliar resonance, and even the church bell tolled a hollow note that trembled, then stopped mid-air, leaving the valley suspended in soundless tension. Sheriff Adler walked the streets with a growing unease pressing on his chest. The events below the Wren farmhouse haunted him, a rhythm he could not shake. Every step, every shadow, seemed alive, aware of his presence, waiting to respond. He passed by the Smithson house, a weathered clapboard at the edge of town, and noticed that the windows were dark, curtains drawn tight. But a faint light flickered inside, as if someone, or something, had been pacing the room with a lantern. Adler hesitated, pressing his hat lower over his eyes. The moment he stepped closer, the light vanished, leaving only the dull reflection of dawn on the glass. A whisper seemed to rise from the floorboards, unintelligible, but insistently coaxing him away. He swallowed and moved on, yet he could not ignore the growing sense that silence itself had become an active force. Back at the sheriff's office, Adler attempted to organize his notes. The journals of Emily and Samuel, the scraps of letters Margaret had left, the faint etchings in the cellar walls, all pointed to the same unnerving truth. The Wren family had not simply survived underground. They had transformed the space, and in doing so, extended that transformation outward. It reached the town, subtle but insidious. A conversation halted mid-sentence. The rooster crowed and froze in mid-note. A baker's oven hissed and then went silent, leaving bread uncooked, its scent trapped in the thick, unmoving air. Alder's phone, though modern for 1899, it was a telegraph system connecting his office to the surrounding stations, crackled once, then died entirely. The air seemed to absorb every sound. The sheriff's hand trembled as he tapped the receiver, testing, pleading, and receiving nothing. It was as though the breathless ritual had expanded its dominion, extending the pact's reach beyond the farmhouse, entwining the town itself in the Wren family's control. That evening, Adler returned to the Wren farmhouse, lantern in hand. The door resisted his push, heavier than wood should have allowed. He forced it open, each groan of the hinges echoing in a valley that had stopped listening. Inside, the house was quiet in an unnatural way, not simply empty, but suspended. He descended the staircase into the chamber once more, the familiar hum already vibrating faintly beneath the floor. The family was present, but different. Emily and Samuel moved with their usual precision, yet there was a subtle intensity in their actions, faster, sharper, more urgent. John's eyes flicked toward Adler briefly, but there was no greeting, no acknowledgement beyond the tacit recognition of his presence. Margaret's voice, when she hummed, carried a tension that Adler could feel, like a wire stretched taut across the stone walls. "You've returned," John said finally, his voice low and measured. "Do you understand what comes from watching?" "I think I do," Adler replied, though the words felt empty in the thick air. "The town, the silence, it's spreading." Margaret's gaze cut through him, sharp and unyielding. "Not spreading. Maintaining. The balance must be preserved. Any intrusion, any carelessness breaks it. And with it, life above ground becomes fragile. You've seen the consequences already." Adler swallowed, recalling the halted sounds and frozen moments he had witnessed. He thought of the baker's oven, the halting rooster, the windows darkened by invisible pressure. "So, it's not just the house. It's everywhere," he whispered. "Yes," John said. "Every breath above must answer to the rhythm below. Every heartbeat, every footstep, every word carries weight. The pact binds us, but it also binds the world around us. You have witnessed it, now you understand its cost." A sudden shift occurred in the chamber. The air thickened further, pressing against Adler's chest with deliberate intent. He staggered slightly, catching himself against the wall. Emily's small hand hovered above the pit, and the mist began to rise, swirling faster than before. Samuel echoed her motions, their synchronization near perfect. The room's pulse quickened, and Adler realized that the ritual was not a fixed performance, it adapted. The air outside the house, the town above, responded to the chamber's movements like an extension of the family's will. "Watch carefully," Margaret whispered. "The consequences are patient, but they are absolute." Adler's attention snapped to the mist. Shapes emerged, fleeting forms that resembled townspeople he recognized. The baker, the blacksmith, even the postmaster, suspended in impossible mid-motion, eyes wide, movements frozen as though paused in time. Their gestures were mundane, but the unnatural stillness marked them as connected to the Wren family's subterranean domain. The sheriff realized with a growing horror that any living being above ground risked entering a state of suspended existence if the pact's rhythm faltered. John stepped toward the pit, his hands resting on the edge, and the shapes above mirrored his movement in frozen tableaus. "The pact is not malevolent," he said. "It is indifferent. It preserves, but it does not discriminate. It responds to rhythm, to pattern, to the breath of those who live outside the balance. The consequences are inevitable for those who ignore it." Adler's mind raced. If the ritual failed even slightly, lives above ground would cease, trapped in stasis, invisible yet eternally present. He thought of his own family, his own breath, and a chill spread through his chest. The pact was no longer confined to the underground chamber. It was a law, and he, the sheriff, had unknowingly become a witness, a participant in a system older than his understanding. The children's whispering grew louder, echoing off the walls. Adler realized that they were not merely speaking to each other. They were communicating with the town above, their voices reaching into the gaps between moments, shaping events, halting actions, bending reality subtly, yet undeniably. Emily's small mouth formed words too delicate to hear fully, but their meaning pressed directly on Adler's consciousness. Careless. Breathless. Consequence. Margaret stepped forward, placing a hand on Adler's shoulder. "You see now why silence is necessary. To speak recklessly is to disrupt the rhythm. To act without understanding is to invite calamity." Adler nodded, sweat forming despite the chamber's chill. He knew that any attempt to interfere, any effort to expose the family's secret, would not be met with hostility, but with inevitability. Those above, those uninitiated, would pay the price for imbalance. Hours passed. The sheriff remained in the chamber, observing. The mist over the pit remained suspended, and the children's synchronized movements guided its slow, deliberate oscillation. John and Margaret alternated between humming and silent focus, the pulse of the chamber tightening and relaxing in rhythm with their will. Adler's notebook lay untouched. No words could capture the weight of the experience, the suffocating awareness of the consequences imposed by the breathless ritual. Finally, Adler rose to leave. Each step upward through the narrow passage was a negotiation with the air itself. It resisted, pressing, shaping, bending, yet he moved, conscious of every inhale, every exhale. At the top of the staircase, the house above seemed normal. Too normal. Windows rattled faintly, doors shifted imperceptibly in their frames. Life continued, but it bore the imprint of the subterranean pact. Outside, the valley was quiet, the weight of the underground ritual pressing invisibly on the town. Adler paused, feeling the last tremor of the pact's rhythm beneath his boots. It was not malevolent, but it was absolute. The Wren family existed on a plane that intertwined with every living thing above ground. Every action carried consequence. Every breath could trigger suspension, halting motion, freezing life. The sheriff mounted his horse and rode back toward Redstone, lantern swaying, eyes alert. He knew the valley would never be the same. The town would continue, unaware, oblivious to the delicate, invisible law maintained by 4 humans underground. But he had seen, and he had felt, and the consequences of silence, the true cost of the breathless ritual, would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. 3 days later, the postmaster's cat was found frozen in mid-leap atop a fence, its body suspended in a moment of perfect, impossible balance. The town accepted it quietly, assuming imagination or fatigue, never knowing the ritual below dictated the pulse of their very existence. Adler walked past the scene, lantern casting shadows long and heavy, and whispered a silent acknowledgement to the family below. The breathless ritual was complete, but its consequences lingered, patient and indifferent. Every inhale above, every heartbeat, every thought of motion carried weight now. Redstone was alive in a different way, tethered to the underground world, bound to the family of 4 who had mastered a power beyond understanding. The pact was not malevolent, not forgiving, but eternal. Adler knew that the next step would require him to confront the Wren family more directly, to understand fully the extent of the ritual and the consequences of failing to respect the delicate balance they maintained. For now, he could do nothing but watch, wait, and endure the oppressive silence that stretched across the town, across the valley, across his very mind. The shattered pattern. The morning fog hung low over Redstone, clinging to the streets like a living thing, dense and unyielding. Sheriff Adler moved cautiously through the town, lantern swinging in his hand. He had barely slept since the events at the Wren farmhouse. Each breath seemed heavier than the last, weighed down by anticipation and the knowledge of what lay beneath the earth. The valley, once vibrant with the sounds of daily life, now felt rigid, as though the town itself were holding a secret it could no longer contain. The baker's oven remained cold, the rooster had yet to crow, and the postmaster's cat still lingered unnaturally on the fence, frozen in its impossible leap. Adler's gaze traveled over each familiar detail, and a subtle terror grew. The balance the Wren family maintained below ground had begun to falter. Small tremors, imperceptible to most, rippled through the town. The air felt thick, resistant to motion, as if the very atmosphere had been instructed to obey rules no one understood. Adler approached the Wren farmhouse again, lantern held high. The door groaned under his push, a sound warped and elongated as if it existed outside the normal rhythm of time. He stepped inside. The house was alive in the strangest way. Faint vibrations emanated from the walls, and shadows moved independently of their sources. A smell, metallic and earthy, rose from the floorboards, the scent of damp soil and something older, something deliberate. In the chamber, the family awaited. John stood near the pit, eyes dark and unblinking. Margaret's hands were clasped, her posture taut, while Emily and Samuel mirrored each other, a synchronization that defied natural possibility. They did not speak immediately. The room itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in sync with the rhythm below. "The pattern is breaking," John said finally, voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "Something outside has disrupted the flow. You have seen the town, the hesitation in movement, the frozen gestures. It begins with a single irregularity, then spreads like frost over glass." Adler stepped closer, lantern casting long, twisting shadows across the walls. "How? What caused it? I haven't done anything." "You have observed," Margaret interrupted, her voice cold and precise. Observation carries weight. Even watching shifts the rhythm. The ritual is sensitive. It measures attention, intent, presence. It reacts. And when it reacts incorrectly, the consequences extend upward. A subtle tremor shivered through the floorboards. Emily's fingers grazed the pit's edge, and the mist above it surged, twisting violently. The forms Adler had seen days ago, townspeople, frozen mid-motion, flickered and stuttered, caught between movement and stillness. Their limbs bent unnaturally, faces contorted with effort to maintain the impossible suspension. Adler's stomach turned. This was no longer distant observation. The ritual's failure was manifesting in grotesque, tangible forms. John stepped forward, placing a heavy hand over the pit. The mist responded, calming slightly, but the tremors continued. The balance is delicate. The pact below is a pattern, a sequence of breaths, gestures, attention. If even one note is wrong, the sequence falters, and the world above becomes unstable. The consequences are inevitable. Margaret moved beside her husband, eyes narrowing. You must intervene, Sheriff. You are part of the pattern now, whether you like it or not. Your movements, your steps, your very breath influence it. Adler's heart pounded. He had imagined that being a witness was passive. Now he understood the terrible truth. His presence, his attempt to comprehend, was altering the ritual, causing distortions above ground. He glanced toward the staircase and pictured the frozen town, the suspended life, and the subtle misalignments that would only worsen if the ritual collapsed entirely. Tell me what to do, Adler said, voice trembling. How do I fix it? John's eyes were steady, almost cruelly calm. There is no fixing in the conventional sense. There is alignment. We must restore the flow, not by force, but by participation. You must synchronize with us, breathe as we breathe, move as we move, attend as we attend. Any deviation will shatter the sequence further. Margaret nodded, producing a set of small, carved tokens from a hidden pouch. Each was marked with cryptic symbols, etched deep into wood. These represent the points of rhythm, she explained. You will place them along the perimeter of the pit. Each token resonates with the energy below. Misplacement or hesitation will amplify the imbalance above. Adler took the tokens, feeling their strange weight in his palms. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, as if absorbing heat rather than giving it off. With each step around the pit, he placed a token, mindful of the precise timing, the subtle cues from the children, the rhythm embedded in the vibrations of the floor. Sweat ran down his back despite the chill. He felt the town above tremble in resonance with each placement, the frozen forms quivering, some dissolving back into mist, others bending in ways that threatened permanent deformation. Emily whispered instructions, not in words Adler could comprehend fully, but in tones, in patterns of motion, in the smallest gestures of her hands. Samuel echoed her, creating a call and response sequence, a melody of movement that Adler had to follow exactly. One misstep, one incorrect pause, and the shapes above would contort further. The air in the chamber thickened, pressing down on him, demanding precision, commanding focus. Hours passed, measured in tremors and tokens. Adler's muscles screamed, but he maintained synchronization, guided by the family's unwavering rhythm. The mist above the pit began to stabilize, solidifying into forms that shimmered like frozen glass rather than chaotic, bending figures. The town above, though still unnaturally quiet, seemed to return to a semblance of order. The baker's oven exhaled warmth once more, the rooster flapped and squawked, and the postmaster's cat leaped down from the fence, landing solidly. John exhaled deeply, his first sign of fatigue showing. The pattern holds, for now, he said. But understand this, the ritual is alive. It adapts. It watches. It tests. Every day it measures, adjusts, corrects. You, Sheriff, are a part of its ongoing evaluation. Do not underestimate your influence. Margaret's eyes bore into Adler's, unwavering. Above ground, the town believes life continues normally. But beneath every floorboard, every stone, every root of the earth beneath redstone, the pact endures. Its consequences are subtle, pervasive, and eternal. You have seen the shattering. Do not provoke another. Adler nodded silently, the weight of understanding settling over him like an iron cloak. The family remained calm now, their synchronization perfect, the rhythm of the ritual re-established. The valley felt alive again, but in a way that no ordinary observer could perceive. The town's pulse was bound to the subterranean chamber, to four humans who had reshaped existence itself. As he ascended the stairs to leave, Adler realized the true extent of what he had witnessed. The breathless ritual was not merely a family secret. It was a law, a living pattern dictating the very possibility of movement and life in the valley. Every sound, every motion, every choice carried consequence. The Wren family did not rule through fear, they governed through the immutable force of inevitability. Outside, the fog had thinned slightly, but the valley remained eerily still. Alder's horse moved with him, its hooves pressing against ground that felt subtly elastic, responsive, measured. The town looked ordinary enough, but Adler knew better. He could feel the pattern beneath every surface, hear it in the silence between breaths, sense it in the imperceptible weight of air on his shoulders. Redstone continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the invisible pulse maintained by the family underground. And yet, Adler could not forget. He understood now that the ritual's pattern was both protection and threat, a delicate lattice binding life above to life below. One misstep, one careless thought, could shatter it. The consequences of failure were not violent or immediate. They were patient, creeping, insidious, and eternal. He mounted his horse and rode away, the Wren farmhouse looming behind him like a sentinel. In the shadows, the four figures remained near the pit, vigilant, unwavering. The pattern was preserved, but Adler knew it would not remain untested. Life above and life below were forever entwined. The consequences of even the smallest disruption could ripple outward, touching every living soul in Redstone. And as he disappeared into the thickening dusk, a single, subtle tremor shivered through the town, almost imperceptible, a reminder that the shattered pattern was never truly stable, never fully contained, and that the Wren family's influence extended beyond the visible, beyond understanding, beyond time itself. The last breath. The valley of Redstone was quiet, impossibly quiet, as though the earth itself were holding its breath. Sheriff Adler rode toward the farmhouse for the final time, the twilight pressing down like a weight on his shoulders. The town behind him seemed ordinary enough, the streets empty, the fog rolling lazily across the low hills, but Adler knew better. Every shadow, every gustless swirl of air carried the memory of what lay beneath. He reached the Wren farmhouse just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house loomed like a sentinel, every board and shutter saturated with the invisible pulse of the ritual. The ground beneath seemed to hum faintly, a resonance Adler felt through the soles of his boots. Each step toward the pit room felt deliberate, measured, as if the earth were testing his intentions. Inside, the family awaited. John's gaze was steady, unyielding. Margaret's posture was taut, vigilant. Emily and Samuel stood together, their small hands clasped in silent communion. The air was thick, heavy with expectation, charged with the rhythm of countless unseen calculations. The tokens Adler had placed days ago remained aligned, resonating subtly, as if singing a song too complex for ordinary ears. "The pattern will not endure indefinitely," John said, voice calm, but carrying the weight of inevitability. "Tonight, it reaches its final test." Margaret stepped forward, producing a small, obsidian mirror from beneath her cloak. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the dim light of the lantern in strange, impossible ways. "The mirror completes the circuit," she explained. "It allows the ritual to close, to reconcile life above with life below. You, Sheriff, will be part of it. One final alignment is required." Adler took a deep breath, recalling the tremors, the frozen townspeople, the subtle distortions he had witnessed. Every step he had taken, every breath he had drawn near this house, had altered the balance. Now he understood fully. He was not an observer. He was an instrument, necessary to conclude the ritual safely. John nodded toward the pit, where a thin mist rose, twisting like smoke frozen midair. "Place the mirror at the edge and focus on the sequence. Align with us." Adler obeyed, hands shaking slightly as he set the obsidian mirror on the pit's lip. Immediately, the mist responded, coiling around the mirror as though drawn to it, refracting light in intricate patterns. Emily whispered directions, small tones, precise gestures, while Samuel echoed her. Each movement created a ripple through the mist, a chain reaction Adler had to follow with exacting precision. The air in the room thickened, becoming almost tangible, pressing against Adler's chest, threading through his veins. He mirrored every motion, every breath, every pause the family indicated. The tokens resonated faintly beneath the floor, each one humming in alignment, tethering the fragile equilibrium between life above and life below. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, for time itself seemed suspended. The mist above the pit began to solidify, forming shapes that shimmered like glass but moved with deliberate intent. Adler felt the town above responding, subtle shifts in the fog, the birds, the distant flow of the river. The pattern was no longer just below ground, it extended outward, touching every corner of Redstone. Then, suddenly, a disturbance. A faint creak from the floorboards outside the ritual chamber. The pattern faltered slightly, the mist wobbling, shapes contorting in minor, terrifying ways. Adler froze, heart hammering. "Focus!" Margaret's command rang sharp, precise. "The alignment is fragile. One thought of doubt, one hesitation, and it collapses." Adler closed his eyes briefly, centering himself, feeling the rhythm of the family, the tokens, the mirror, the very pulse of the earth beneath him. When he opened them, the shapes in the mist were steady again, shimmering with clarity, reflecting a pattern so intricate it seemed almost alive. John spoke then, his tone solemn. "We are ready." The family joined hands over the pit, eyes closed. Emily and Samuel's voices rose in a low, harmonic whisper, a counterpoint to the rhythm of the tokens. The mirror vibrated faintly, light bending across its obsidian surface. Adler's own hands pressed lightly against the edge of the pit, his mind emptying of fear, aligning entirely with the motion, the breath, the sequence. A tremor ran through the chamber, subtle at first, then stronger, reverberating through walls, floor, and ceiling. The air outside shivered in response, a ghostly pulse, barely perceptible, then growing, echoing across the town. Shapes outside the farmhouse, the frozen baker, the suspended cat, even the halted river, stirred imperceptibly, aligning with the ritual's final breath. "The last breath," John whispered. "It must be given, and received, in perfect measure." Margaret placed her hand atop Adler's, guiding him. "Do not pull away. Do not hesitate. It is not just our lives, it is the balance of Redstone itself." Adler felt a cold surge, threading through every fiber of his being. The pit mist rose, spiraling, connecting with the obsidian mirror, then cascading upward in a vertical ribbon of frozen motion. Every token pulsed, emitting a vibration that Adler felt deep in his chest, syncing with his heartbeat. Suddenly, the shapes of the children above the pit, the echoes of the townspeople, the suspended life, reached out toward the ribbon, merging slowly, impossibly, into a coherent pattern of motion. Adler realized with awe that the ritual was not about freezing life, but weaving it into a new lattice of existence, one that connected all things in Redstone, above and below, in harmony. A final shudder passed through the pit. The mist collapsed inward, the mirror absorbed the energy, and the room went still. Every token lay inert. The family lowered their hands. The air, which had been thick and suffocating, lightened, flowing freely for the first time in days. Outside, the valley seemed to exhale. Birds called. Leaves rustled. A distant dog barked. The town resumed its natural rhythm, unaware of the catastrophe that had almost occurred, unaware of the invisible lattice that now held life in perfect equilibrium. Adler stepped back, trembling. It's over?" John shook his head slightly. "It is concluded, but not finished. The pattern endures. It watches, it adjusts, and it will measure again. The world above is balanced for now. The lattice will continue to demand attention, precision, and care. But tonight, the last breath has been given, and Redstone is safe." Margaret's gaze softened, her voice almost a whisper. "Remember, Sheriff, the pact is patient. It waits." It is not vengeance, not mercy, but inevitability. Life will continue, yes, but never beyond the pattern's measure. Adler nodded, finally understanding the gravity of what he had witnessed. He had not merely survived a night of terror. He had become part of a system older and more powerful than he could have imagined. Every step he took from that moment forward would ripple through the unseen lattice, every thought, every movement, every breath carrying consequence. The family descended into the pit one final time, their forms swallowed by the mist that remained faintly shimmering in the chamber's center. The tokens remained, inert but intact, a subtle promise of continuity. The house returned to its quietude, the hum of the earth beneath now stable, a deep and eternal rhythm. Adler mounted his horse and rode away, the last light of day fading behind him. Redstone looked unchanged, peaceful even, but he knew the truth. Beneath the familiar streets, the lattice persisted, connecting all lives, measuring all movements, patiently observing. The Wren family's legacy was not one of fear or horror, it was vigilance, a living testament to the delicate balance between above and below, between motion and stillness, life and the unseen forces that govern it. And somewhere beneath the earth, the lattice pulsed quietly, watching, waiting, eternal.